Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Music Den. I am, of course, your host, Armando Venditti, and in this episode, I'm going to be tackling the third and for now final installment of a series sounds very pretentious, but the series I call Where Are They Now? Now, in the last two installments, I talked about Del Bello and Luba. In this installment, I'm going to be talking about another female Canadian artist, but I'm also going to be talking about the band she fronted. The artist is Carol Pope, and the band is Rough Trade. Now, Carol Pope was born August 6th, 1950, in Manchester, UK. She grew up in Canada, and she met her musical partner, Kevin Staples, in Scarborough, which is in the East End of Toronto. I know it very well. And they started to perform together under the banner of Rough Trade. Now, they started to perform in Yorkville, in Toronto, in I'd say around 66, and Rough Trade officially formed in 1968. Now, just to backtrack a little bit, um, Yorkville in Toronto was considered the hotbed for folk artists that were performing in the local coffee shops and bars in Yorkville. Artists such as Gordon Lightfoot, Joni Mitchell, Neil Young, John Kay of Steppenwolf, James Taylor, Buffy Sainte-Marie, and, of course, up and coming Rough Trade. They performed again for the first time in 1968. Their first performance was in a club at midnight. The name of the club escapes me right now, but I do remember reading, that the audience only had four members. And the MC for the evening was none other than Dan Aykroyd. This was years before he hit it big with Saturday Night Live. Now, Kevin Staples and Carol Pope were the two mainstays in Rough Trade. There was a revolving door of musicians that came and went with the band, but these two, Carol Pope and Kevin Staples, stayed with the band throughout its 20-year run. Now, they evolved into what would be, I'd say, alternative pop, R&B, and new wave. But what set them apart from the other acts out on the scene at that time in Toronto was that Carol Pope is lesbian, and she very much was proud of that fact, and she explored that avenue in their lyrics and in her stage gear. She often wore bondage gear when she performed on stage. And she, how can I put this delicately? Would use the microphone stand in a ways that I cannot mention on this show because we're a family show. But it got the attention of people around and the audiences. In the mid 70s, Rough Trade were given an offer by Nimbus Productions to record some of the material. So they went into the studio. The sessions were produced by Jack Richardson, who has worked with Aerosmith, etc. What they did was they recorded this album, 8 songs. It was called Rough Trade Live. It was not recorded in front of an audience. It was recorded directly to disc. Now, direct to disc means that you record to an analog master. You do not record on tape. You do not do any overdubs, do not do any retakes, any edits. The take is the take. And you have about 15 to 20 minutes per side to do this. So they did this. They continued to gig around Toronto. They finally were noticed by Bernie Finkelstein from True North Records, which was distributed at the time through Sony CBS, which is now Sony Music. He signed them because he believed that they were an original band, very forward-thinking, a fantastic R&B band. And also other artists such as Geddy Lee has referred to Rough Trade as a fantastic R&B band. The subject matter of their lyrics never changed. It was always dealing with sexuality, either very blatant, very in the forefront, or subtext, more blatant than subtext. And again, Carol Pope being the front woman, she was very proud of who she was as a person, very confident in her stage performance, and very bold in her presentation. When they, we'll get to that in a second, I jumped ahead. They released their first album through True North Records called Avoid Freud. And the lead off single from that album was High School Confidential. This was by far the most racy, sexually oriented track that's ever been released, and that was a top 40 single for any band. 104.5 Chum FM in Toronto offered to take them into the studio and re-record one of the lyrics on the track because it was so racy, they could not release it on radio. So with Chum FM flipping the bill, Rough Trade went in and redid the track. I prefer the original myself, but that's just me. Anyways, when they performed on the Juno Awards that year, the Junos are considered Canada's version of the Grammys. Carol Pope could not resist, how can I put this delicately, grabbing herself in a certain spot during the live performance. She knew that if she do the run through before the performance, that they would have stopped her. So she waited to the live performance, live airing of the award show to do it. And again, it created controversy, which is what she loved to do. Moving on to 1981, they recorded their second album called For Those Who Think Young. And it had featured the single All Touch. And in terms of Carol Pope's vocal style, she can have a very throaty vocal style, very almost like her vocals come from the diaphragm, but very unique, very original. And again, the lyrical content on the albums were mostly relationship-based, sexually oriented, and again, she made no apologies for that. They were gaining notoriety, and in 1982, they released the third release for True North, which is called Shake the Foundations. Featuring the track Crimes of Passion, which is one of my favorite tracks. My favorite track is coming up. Crimes of Passion featured Bruce Cockburn on background vocals. And it's a very funky track. Very keyboard oriented, very bass driven, but also very funky at the same time. It just added to the popularity. Also performing on the album was Nona Hendryx. Nona Hendryx is a singer who performed with the band LaBelle in the 1970s. If you remember Lady Marmalade, she performed with them in the 70s. She began an association with Rough Trade, specifically Carol Pope and Kevin Staples. They in turn wrote and recorded a couple of songs for Nona Hendryx' album Nona in 1983. Moving on to 1983, speaking of which, Rough Trade released their album Weapons. Now, the production on Weapons is more slick, more streamlined in my view. The lead off track Weapons was a single. Shadow track was a single. Also, there's another track that started off side 2, Decca Dance, which was a single. And the third single that I remember, which is my favorite, is called Territorial. Now, again, very funk-oriented track. It pops like right out of the gate, and it also features Nona Hendryx on background vocals. And if you've seen the video, it's on YouTube. It was featured very heavily on Much Music in Canada throughout the album run. And Territorial for me is my favorite Rough Trade track. There's no way around it. It's funk galore, I call it, basically. Moving on to 1984, their next release, O Tempora or O Mores, can never get that name out, was their last release for True North. In terms of catalog releases, they did release a greatest hits in '85 called Birds of a Feather. But O Tempora or O Mores, did not do as well. It had the single Sexual Outlaw on it, but it did not fare as well and do as well as the previous releases. But through all this, Carol Pope did do recordings for other artists. She did a duet on a track from a group called the Payolas, which featured Paul Hyde on lead vocals, and one Bob Rock on guitars and various keyboard instrumentation. Bob Rock, as you know, is producer extraordinaire. He's worked with The Cult, Metallica, Kingdom Come, Motley Crue, Sarah McLachlan. He's worked with Jan Arden. I think you may have heard of him. But again, back to Carol Pope. She has recorded various singles for with other bands. She released her debut EP called Radiate in 1995. It's since been released as recently as 2022. Just to backtrack a little bit, in 1986, and she was asked to contribute lyrics to Pink Floyd's release of Momentary Lapse of Reason. But according to Carol Pope, she doesn't believe that many of the lyrics that she presented to David Gilmour and company were used for the album. But, I digress. She released, this is interesting, she released her autobiography in 2001 called Anti-Diva. Now, I have this book. I read this book. I needed to smoke a cigarette after reading this book. And when I say that, I don't mean it in the way that you're thinking, probably. This woman has lived a life. Her experiences in the music business, trying to get signed, trying to get ahead in the music business and get noticed. She has had experiences. She's written about romantic dalliances with Andrea Martin from SCTV, with Bob Ezrin, of all people, music producer extraordinaire. She has had a relationship. It was first talked about in her book that she had a relationship with Dusty Springfield in the early 80s. And also, one funny story in this book is Bernie Taupin of Elton John fame basically made a pass at her at one of the shows that they were at together. And she basically told him she wasn't interested and why she wasn't interested. I won't go into what she said because it was quite graphic. But he basically threw himself at her and she threw him back. So she was not shy to say who she was and what she wanted. Okay. Moving on, according to my notes here, she released her first full-length album called Transcend in 2005. She released her last full-length album in 2011 called Landfall. Now, that album, Landfall, features a duet that she did with Rufus Wainwright, another openly gay performer, a pianist who is very proud of himself, of who he is, and make no bones about it. He's very, very confident in himself as a musician and him as a gay performer. Carol Pope, moving on, has released other singles. In 2017, she released the single "This Is Not a Test." So she has been performing, releasing singles all through her career. She has also been a performer at Pride events in Toronto and in New York. She currently resides in New York. Unfortunately, in 2018, she had to cancel some summer performances and then cancel a tour schedule altogether due to the fact that she broke her ankle and she could not be as mobile as she wanted to be. And continuing with her releases, she, as recently as 2021, collaborated with another Canadian band called Church of Trees, and they released a single called World's a Bitch. And again, in 2021. She has also worked with another Canadian artist named Clara Vance, and they have a single out together called Speaking in Code. Now, what to say about Carol Pope? Personally, for me, I think she's a one-off. She has collaborated with so many different artists. Excuse me. I forgot to mention that in 1984, she also performed on Dabello's album, Human Forces, on the track Animal, which she does basically a vocal trade-off, a vocal duet with Dabello, and she does an amazing job. She has always been and always will be a force to reckon with. And she's very confident in her abilities to perform. Her one regret that she had said way back in 1982 was that she hoped and wanted Rough Trade to be more successful and more popular than they were. But unfortunately, with the fact that her lyrical content, excuse me, basically dealt with homoeroticism and lesbian themes, she really wasn't going to get far, unfortunately. And, the tide has turned. And some of the stuff that she did back in the 70s that was considered risque or taboo today would be laughed at. Because again, if you look at the videos that are on TV today in the States and around the world, what she did in the 70s was nothing. It wasn't there was nothing to be compared to what was going on today. To me, she is a fantastic talent. She's a trailblazer for female artists out there, and they could really learn a trick or two from watching past interviews and past footage of Carol Pope on stage. And if you were lucky to be able to see her in concert, you're quite fortunate. So that's it for today, and I hope to be doing more of these Where Are They Now videos in the future. Please leave your comments down below if you have seen Rough Trade in concert, if you've heard of them. I'd like to try and get an open dialogue going here. And again, hit like and subscribe and hit the notification bell to keep you on top of any new content that I've got coming up. I've got some other videos that I'm formulating in my head that I want to do, and I'm going to put up for next week. So, but for now, that's it. And I hope you guys are having a good weekend. I hope you're taking care of yourselves and each other. And I will talk to you very soon. Bye for now.